Hello, I'm Alex Mearns and welcome to the Executive Edge podcast. I'm really excited to announce that I'm joined here today with Jieun Wrigley, who is an ex-Goldman Sachs banker, an ex-journalist, and now unravels the madness of modern nutrition as she's a functional nutritionist. Most of her clients are in their 40s and 50s. They've tried many things before and they're still stuck. I'm really excited to welcome her today because it's the first time I'm talking to a nutritionist. Like me, she came from a non-nutrition, non-health and fitness background. I suspect that her investigative skills have opened up this whole world to her and looking at things from a different perspective. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. Hi, Jieun. Welcome.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's get started. So how does one go from Goldman Sachs to functional nutrition? Maybe you can tell us about that journey.
Well, I have to say I started because motherhood was a wake-up call. I had my children and I thought I knew most things about food and nutrition. I grew up in Los Angeles where everyone's trying to be healthy. But when I had kids and when my kids were unwell, I realized that there was a lot that I didn't know. So just a little bit about my story. I started with my son when he was about 4 months old. He had just transitioned from breastfeeding to formula. And, he had 3 days of constipation. I took him to the pediatrician and I just thought, this isn't normal. And the pediatrician said, don't worry, we can wait till 9 days. And I just thought, this is crazy. So I went home and, my child...
You can wait 9 days without a poopy.
Exactly,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
So I was shocked by that. And so I went home and I kept thinking, the doctor didn't even ask me, did I switch from breastfeeding to formula? He didn't ask any questions really about what's going into my child. But I figured out that it was actually the formula. It was overloaded in iron. And if you know, iron can cause constipation when it's at high doses. So anyways, removed that and he healed and he was fine. But next was my daughter. My daughter had a number of ear infections, constant runny nose. This is when she was about 1.5, 2 years old. I took her to a number of GPs and I got the same thing. I got, here are some antibiotics, here's a prescription. But no one ever asked me questions that tried to get to the root cause. Why is she having this dribbly nose? Why is her ear constantly getting infected? She's 2, she's at home, she wasn't at school. But then it got more serious and I had to take her to a couple of ENTs. And there the solutions were surgery or let's remove her adenoids. Let's do surgery to insert grommets into her eardrum. So all of these things I just thought, well, but no one's asking, questions about how and why. So that was it for me. The disconnect between, what we're putting into our bodies and how we feel, it was just too stark of a difference. So I figured out that it was food and it was inflammation. And that was how my kids got better. So I decided I needed to do a deep dive. And so went back to school, did all the pre-med courses, and then decided to study nutrition science and did a deep dive into now, today, what I know is foundational truth. We are chemical beings, every cell, every enzyme, every immune reaction. This is because we are not only cellular beings, we're also spiritual and emotional. But at the end of the day, food is a chemical instruction and it has an impact on how we feel. So that's kind of how I got into being a nutritionist and switching from, Goldman to the gut.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when you were working with your kids, did you work with any practitioners? Where did you get the information? Obviously, you weren't getting the information from your doctors and the medical community, which I understand. But where were you getting your information from primarily?
Really good question. I lucked out. By the fifth specialist that I saw, I went in super frustrated, super angry, as most parents will be when they're not getting questions for their kids. And I sort of challenged the doctor to think outside the box. And the doctor at the time was open-minded and said, hey, these are some theories that we don't actually prescribe in clinic, but this is something that I'm also interested in. So I got super lucky and worked with that practitioner. And this is how we started to go down the food as medicine route.
Oh, that's really good. So you found a holistic medical doctor.
Yes.
Those are very rare.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting because in my own story, when I went into the doctors and he said, okay, you've got high cholesterol, pre-diabetic, high blood pressure, overweight, high BMI, et cetera, he's like, right, you can take all these statin drugs. How long for? Well, for the rest of your life, potentially. So I walked out and the first thing I did was look up cholesterol on Wikipedia. And it was like, cholesterol, essential building blocks of all cell membranes. I thought, this is interesting. And then cholesterol, how many cells are there in the body? 10 trillion. So I was thinking, well, why is my cholesterol trying to kill me then?
Exactly.
So that was what opened it up. So just good old Wikipedia, but it just opened up this Pandora's box of, okay, there's a lot of stuff we don't.
Yeah, there's a huge misunderstanding. Yeah. I mean, cholesterol, for example, like you were saying, it's crucial. It's part of every cell. It's like, I like to call it the scaffolding within our cell.
Yes.
You have too much of that scaffolding. That's not good, but we need some of it for that cellular architecture. Yeah. But cholesterol is so demonized now, and we think of it as something that we have to lower only through prescriptions, when really we need to understand what role does cholesterol play in our bodies, and why do we have it, and how can we manage it?
Yeah, I was thinking, we'll circle back to cholesterol, but I just want to, before then, just to sort of tee it up. What type of clients do you work with now? What do they look like? What's their demographic? What kind of problems do they have? And is high cholesterol one of the things that they look at?
Yeah, but no, that's a very common one that I see.
Because when I see clients, I really want to drill down to the root cause of what they want, right? And I don't think anyone cares about high cholesterol. They only care about it because the doctor says you have high cholesterol, ergo you're going to have a heart attack and die. That's what they care about.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think sometimes the biomarkers don't necessarily make sense to the individual. So this is kind of one of the guiding principles that I use in my practice and in just my philosophy. Really, it's that understanding is transformation. So I'm going to repeat that. Understanding is transformation. And it means not just knowing the facts, but it means feeling the weight of that information and seeing the connections. And then when we understand all of that, we can then change. But a lot of times we see these biomarkers and we see them and we know that, okay, high LDL is not necessarily a good thing, but we are not feeling the weight of that. And we're not seeing the connections of, well, how do I change it? How can I affect it? So I think this is the disconnect, and why our understanding, even though we think we know it, we're not changing those habits. We're not changing to transform ourselves. So that's kind of this guiding principle. So for me, I really try to educate the people that I work with. You asked me, well, what kind of clients do you see? I typically see clients that are, let's say, have complex issues. And I don't mean like complex in the sense that they're, that I might see cancer patients, I might see autoimmune patients, but really when I talk about complex, it means that there are many layers to this individual. Yes, the biochemical side of things, but there's also the lifestyle piece. There's the context in which they are living in, high stress, lots of travel. So there are layers to these humans. And I think when we look at it from a functional perspective, we have to actually look at the individual. Yes, their labs and their biomarkers, because that's the evidence. But to get to the feeling that, the weight of this information, we need the context. We need the whole person.
No, I agree totally. And that's really what the word holistic means, right?
Exactly.
Taking a step back, looking at the big picture. And for me in this industry, there are many, many, many specialists, specialists that look at one very small part of the puzzle. But actually, I think what we're really lacking is people that specialize in being generalists and knowing a little bit about everything so you can actually see the big picture and step back. Yeah. And I think that when we're looking at cholesterol, or in particular what doctors are worried about, high LDL cholesterol, they're just looking at one piece of the puzzle on a giant puzzle board. And prescribing medication based on that piece of the puzzle, to me, is just ludicrous, particularly as we know that it's not even an independent indicator of heart disease anymore. And I listened to this podcast with this life insurance chap who was issuing life insurance policies to incredibly wealthy people in California. And he says, we just don't look at LDL cholesterol, a million other markers, but that one, it's just, as an independent variable, it's just not used anymore. Very interesting.
Yeah, no, I think you're right in that The model and the paradigm of the current medical system is great at addressing acute situations, when we are in disease. Absolutely. But everything before that, the preventative measures, leading up to the chronic disease, that's where the gaps are there. I can't remember I read this quote recently. It's that, the body whispers before it screams. So the doctors are great. Our medical system is great when our body is screaming, but we're not listening to the whispers. And I think that's where we need to really start.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Kids do. But then as we get older and we get caught up in work and life and things like that, we just ignore this stuff and we think we can just go and medicate it away. But the body will keep giving you the message until, as my mentor says, who's also from LA, the pain teacher will come along and then you won't be able to ignore it anymore.
That's actually what I see a lot of people. I often say, when you're at your point of pain, then you'll come and see me. Because a lot of times people go and see the GP, the specialist here. They'll do scopes, from the top to the bottom and everything. And they don't get an answer. And then they say, well, I don't really want to change what I eat. And then they come and see me and they're like, and then we do change that and then we get better. Yeah. But I understand absolutely. It's very hard to change, what we put in, because food is so many things.
I know.
Food is taste, it's memory, it's culture. But it's also chemical instruction at the end of the day.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. It's quite sad that people have to go through the medical community first before taking charge. I remember one of the very first clients we were going to work with, we didn't. And then I'll tell you why. She had breast cancer. She'd just been diagnosed. Her mother had died from breast cancer. Her sister had breast cancer, and she'd just been diagnosed with breast cancer. And she was talking about the programs and sort of what would I need to do? And we're not a cancer specialist, but we just help people get healthier, right? So the cancer cannot exist in the presence of a healthy being. And I said, well, we probably need to look at your diet. We might have to make some changes there. Oh, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then it's like, I can't really help you then.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Which is unusual, actually. Most people who have cancer are quite willing to make some changes.
Yeah. But no, how many times have you heard people where they go and see their doctor and they get the treatment, but then after that they walk out and they don't know what to do at home. So that's also a disconnect that I think conversations like this, I think, really help, is that, medical professionals are trying to do their best, but it's the at-home recovery that's where people fall off. And a lot of times these treatments work, but then it's the follow-up and it's the day-to-day that's where we're lacking a bit.
Yeah, and that's obviously where the coaching comes in, that really helps to get people back on track so they can take control of their own destiny. So when you see someone with high cholesterol, what other things are you looking at or examining in their life that could be going wrong?
Mm-hmm. Well, cholesterol is one biomarker, and it does tell you that, there is some dysfunction in the liver. The liver is the headquarters for all the cholesterol. That's how I like to call it. It regulates, your synthesized cholesterol, and it decides, how to excrete it and how to use it. Cholesterol is that parent molecule, and I like to call the kids of cholesterol. It's vitamin D. It's the bile acids. It's all your sex hormones, and it's cortisol as well. So you want to think, where is that cholesterol? Which child is getting a lot of attention? Hopefully not cortisol. Hopefully more of the sex hormones. Hopefully the vitamin D or the bile acids. But no. So I look at that, but I also want to see, other markers. I want to see the liver. How does it partner with the kidney? How does it partner with the thyroid? How does, if I could have stool data on the microbiome, I mean, that tells so many details. So really having a standard panel is very helpful, because we can at least just see where that person is.
I mean, the standard medical panel.
Like a medical,
I agree. Yeah, exactly. It's a good starting point.
It's a good starting point. But then also I want to know what they're eating, and because the liver, remember, is not only in charge of cholesterol and all the downstream products that it makes, but it's also a detoxifying organ. So it's responsible for, all the detoxification of the things that we breathe in, the things that we put on our skin, the things that we ingest, the hormones that we produce. So there's a lot of important functions going on. So, kind of seeing how that organ plays with all the other organs is very helpful.
So it's I always like to look at the ALT and the AST scores, which I'm sure you do on the liver, because if they're kind of low, then I'm not too stressed. But if they're high, it's like, okay, we definitely have a detox issue here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But on top of that, like we're also, I'm also looking at someone's, food intake. Obviously, are they getting enough fiber? Most people aren't. Most people are getting a lot of protein, but not enough fiber. And they don't understand why they need to have the fiber. So that's a lot of what I spend in sessions educating about fiber and the importance of fiber and the benefits. But I think we also have to look at, lifestyle and work stress. Like most of the people who watch this podcast are probably high performers. They're executives and they've got crazy travel schedules. So, the body likes routine, but when you have, night calls that you've got to make with New York and you're on a plane the next morning, it is hard. So it's kind of factoring in this bigger picture and trying to find where we can tweak. I don't want to overhaul your diet and lifestyle in one day. We want to make minor tweaks. And when you feel good, you probably want to make further tweaks and changes.
Yes. So you're looking at diet and stress would be the main two, would you say, in terms of the inputs that could be going awry?
Yeah. I mean, those are the two things we can control per se, right?
Yeah.
So yes, we want to look at the things that we can control immediately. So, I mean, it also, every conversation around nutrition, it depends on the person. So if I were speaking to, let's say, a single parent who's working 3 jobs, and barely making kind of minimum wage, right? My conversation is going to be very different than if I'm speaking with someone who is a CEO, and has, a number of people they can delegate to. Someone's preparing their meals, right? So context matters.
Yeah. No, the CEO with the helper at home is a very interesting one, because I feel that, obviously if you're relatively well off and you have help at home, there's no excuse not to eat healthy home-cooked meals. And if you're not, you don't have a nutrition problem, you have a management problem. He's not managing your helper correctly, or just not putting the effort into it.
I don't know.
So that's quite an easy change, right?
Yeah, it's not necessarily the effort. It's also sometimes if you don't understand why, it's very hard to make that change. Like if you give kids broccoli and they're like, oh, mommy says eat it or daddy says I have to eat it, but they don't the taste isn't great, then they might not want to eat it. But you explain to them why it's good for you, then they might be more open to, initiating and having their own broccoli. So I think that understanding is super important.
Yes. No, it's funny you mentioned broccoli, because I've got a couple of interesting stories around that. So first off, if you buy the non-organic broccoli in the supermarket, I remember going to a kid's party and they had a big pile of it like that. And I thought, they're ambitious. Nobody touched it. I went over and tried it. This stuff was cold, had no taste, and it was mushy, right? It had been overcooked. It was disgusting. It's like, I can't even eat this stuff, But then you get an organic broccoli, which tastes much sweeter, and then you oven roast it with a little butter and some sea salt on in the oven, and that caramelizes it and brings it even more, and you give it to the kids and they love it.
Yeah, exactly.
So the quality of the ingredients and the way you prepare it.
Yeah, totally. And presentation, we eat with our eyes first, right?
Yeah.
So presentation also matters.
Yeah, and I have an interesting concept about fiber, which I haven't done much research on, but it kind of makes sense. I was thinking, why do kids hate vegetables so much? They're just not interested in vegetables. Why do adults like vegetables? And if you look at the nutritional micronutrient profile of sort of meat plus starchy carbs like potatoes, sweet potatoes, etc., you can pretty much tick all the boxes, apart from vitamin C, which you can get from fruits or veggies, right? You can pretty much get everything. And I was thinking, the kids are born kind of perfectly. They're not very toxic. The mother's placenta should have removed most of that, right? But as we get older, we accumulate toxicity through our lifestyle, working in cities and things like that. We need more veggies. We need more fiber. We need more detox. So I was wondering if there's the kids actually don't need it as much.
Yeah, no, so actually I think We do actually need to start really young with the kids. I actually think it's a matter of palate that we're training. So I think when kids start with breast milk, you actually get a lot of different flavors from whatever your parent is eating, whatever the mother is eating. But when we move on to first foods, and before that, we often move into formula. Formula is, milk. It's lactose. It's very sweet. So we're already pre-programmed when we switch from breast milk to formula. But then what we need to do really is we need to introduce those veggies early, because actually, if you look at microbiome data from early years, even newborn infant, like first day stool, which is called meconium, that is actually predictive. You can see different trajectories of the microbiome and how healthy and how diverse it is. And you can see the trajectory of what kind of obesity levels kids have, or potential neurological issues from that first stool. So that feeding the microbiome and fiber, we think that kids don't like it, but I think it's actually the way we're training them.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That is very interesting. Yeah, so we're kind of like, it's a lot of it's based on what they've sort of genetically inherited, or just in the first sort of 9 months of pregnancy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Nutrition starts from day one.
Yeah.
And we can change that. So if you feed a child, their first food, and it's, let's say, a banana or an apple, right? That sweet receptors, those are still constantly activated. What we need to do is really focus on the more bitter, the more vegetables, and start there, and then build up towards the sweet. Because as human beings, we're always going to gravitate towards that anyways.
Yes.
So we really, as a habit with young kids, we need to get the fiber in early, and the taste for that, because it is a little bitter. It isn't sweet.
All particularly I'm from the UK, and the first time you have some alcohol or a pint of beer, it's quite bitter, but everyone changes their palate.
Exactly, the palate. I mean, even if you go out and you ate, let's say, at a restaurant every day, you'd say, wow, this is so flavorful. And you go home and you try to make your own meal. It's not as salty. There's less sauce. But then you eat at home for, let's say, a week or two. Then you go to a restaurant and you're like, wow, that's so salty. So our palate changes pretty fast.
Yeah. No, I've done it with my son, actually. So I gave him liver from a young age, beef liver, which is much stronger than chicken liver or pork liver. And because I'd read that if you don't give it to them before the age of 4, they won't like it when they're older. And obviously, it's in my opinion, it's one of the most nutritional foods in the world, and it's you don't need to have much, but just a little bit each week.
Yeah, it is quite intense.
Yeah,
okay, so your son likes liver then.
Yeah, so he eats liver. So what I did is I wanted to change the concept of the word treat, so I kind of manipulated it. So like tuna belly or toro, I would say that is a treat for you. And so now if it's his birthday, he wants to go out and eat tuna belly for a treat, which is super high in omega-3s, right?
Yeah. So actually for me, when I advise parents, I actually try to disassociate the word treat from food.
Yeah,
because
from McDonald's.
Or from anything really. I really try to encourage parents to understand that food is a chemical instruction. It's it's meant for health. It's meant to support our body. I like to use the word treat as something different, something, candy or chocolates or tuna. I'd say let's try to disassociate food from reward. I would say treat would be more like, let's have time with dad to read a book together, or let's go to the cinema, or let's go have a walk around the block. That is a treat, a real treat of time. Whereas food, I'm trying to keep as it's something that we give ourselves, not only for fuel, but it's also taste and it's culture again, but it's also, at the end of the day, it's a chemical instruction.
Yeah, I get it. You're kind of removing the emotional attachment to food. Although that is kind of difficult, because we all grow up in societies where essentially we celebrate special occasions with food. Yeah. And you can think back to, great happy times in your life. For me, Christmas dinners with the big family and things like that. Definitely not a food on display.
No, absolutely. But, and that's why it's, it's so linked. But, equally at that Christmas dinner, let's say you couldn't partake in the festive foods, but you were there with your family still, opening presents, trying on different Christmas sweaters. I know the English like to do that, right? Like, and you're there and you're joking.
That my grandmother knitted.
Exactly. You're still having a great time. Like you can still partake in that. But we do associate with food. But I'm hoping that we can actually try and teach kids to disassociate that emotion, because on the other end, we do see a lot of emotional eating.
It's too much. You're right. It's gone way too much the wrong way. I totally agree. Yeah. It's really sad. And the food industry, the food's just getting worse in the developed world as we try and feed 8 billion people on the planet, and certain companies, large food companies, just want to increase profits. The food just gets worse and worse.
I mean, we could do a deep dive on food and economics.
No, well, the sad thing is really I've done the research, right? And when it comes to weight loss, which is probably the most common thing that people are interested in, and we're kind of an interesting sort of gym and nutrition and lifestyle center, because we're the only gym that probably doesn't do weight loss. We focus on health. And the idea is if you focus on your health, then the weight loss comes off as a result of that along the way. And I think you have a similar
absolutely. Weight loss is something I never ask people what they weigh, or, for me, I always explain that weight loss is a positive side effect. It's a byproduct. So when we target inflammation, and that's kind of my strategy, is I'm looking at the person saying, all right, we need to know what's causing you inflammation, because inflammation takes a lot of energy to put out, inflammation, like a fire. You need to quell that or quench that. And so that uses energy. So where is that energy stored in our body? It's stored as fat. Where is that fat? Usually that visceral fat around our waist. So rather than just addressing the fat and the fat loss, we identify the root cause of that inflammation. The downstream positive effects are that the weight comes off. Yeah, no, I agree. And it comes off at a sustainable rate. Exactly.
And that's my two big issues with the industry at the moment. It is sad to say, but based on my research, 95% of people who are overweight now are going to die overweight, which is really, really sad, because the industry is totally set up for us to fail. And generally, nothing really works beyond sustainable weight loss, which is what nobody wants, because it takes too bloody long. Right? And all these places out there which sell supplements, pills, abs in 5 minutes, none of that stuff is sustainable. And the industry, because the food is just getting worse and worse, is to make it harder and harder. Ergo, we have to use more and more willpower to say no to these things.
Exactly. And relying on willpower is exhausting.
Oh, yeah. So because you use it all up at work.
Exactly.
So it's like you've got none left.
So my philosophy.
What can we do? Help.
My philosophy is we don't want to rely on weight loss, right? Change is really a number of small habits that compound, and then ultimately you look back, and then you have change. So really it's about finding those small little habits to change. Then we create a bigger transformation. But the weight loss is difficult, because again, it's not just someone's biochemistry, but it's their, context situation. I mean, I had one person I was working with, and, they understood everything. They were incredibly analytical, understood what they needed to do, but when they got home, they couldn't implement it. They had a spouse that was not supportive. They had a kitchen set up that wasn't made for healthier meals. So because of that disconnect, so again, going back to, you can know the facts, you can even almost feel it, but then, and feel the weight of like, I do need to change, but you know what? I can't seem to connect my house, my own kitchen, and get support from my spouse to make those. So,
no, you make a great observation. And I think that's a big problem. It's certainly a big problem I've seen with my clients, which is why I went out and hired a executive coach / psychologist to help with people who they knew what to do, or they knew enough. But why weren't they doing it? Why were they binge watching Netflix till 2 a.m. and eating popcorn or candy or what have you, right? They know, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
so it's like we need to get to the root cause, which is really their career, their job, maybe their boss, maybe the relationship with their spouse. But no, the advice I would give would be useless until they can fix it.
And that's why where everyone's looking for that easy pill, that quick injection.
Oh, here we go. Well, I'm going to have to ask you about Ozempic now. Then.
Oh, okay. Well, we won't use brands, but we can.
Is that a brand? Is it
the GLP inhibitors?
Okay,
right?
sorry. Yeah,
So no, really, look.
You can tell your ex-journalist telling me not to use brands on the telly.
I think it's, obviously, again, it's a bigger conversation for some people. You are at the risk of dying because you have metabolic syndrome and you're severely obese. And you've tried everything, but you just can't seem to sustain it. Sometimes something like a GLP inhibitor is coming in and it's helping people pivot. But the problem is right now, it's not those people who are at severe risk that are using it. It's anyone who's a little bit overweight right now, and they just want a quick drop. And what we're not focusing on is, well, where is that weight coming from? It's most of the time it's muscle mass and it's bone density.
Yes.
And so you see people go on it and they're losing all this weight dramatically because they're not hungry and they're not eating, but they're also becoming really micronutrient deficient.
Yes.
And the second they get off of it, they gain the weight back. And I think there's a study, I think that they said in about a year and a half, all that weight is put on back.
It comes back.
So it means that either you have to stay on it long term, which has its own, other risks. So I think it's really about each individual, understanding their context, but not always looking for that quick solution, because, for example, if you're someone who has a sensitive thyroid, or your thyroid is off and you're taking these sorts of medicines, and you look on the first warning page on the website of that company, thyroid dysfunction, thyroid cancer is something that they're highlighting. So you have to know yourself first, and you have to know yourself, okay, well, is this something that I should really consider? And you've got to weigh those, the benefits versus the risks.
Yeah, no, I quite agree. I think that medical interventions like that are only helpful if they can kind of boost maybe your energy levels or effort or willpower in the short term, so that then you can implement the healthy lifestyle changes permanently and then get rid of the medical intervention. But of course, I don't think many people are thinking, if it just gets you over a hump and then you've got rid of it for life, then it's okay.
I think a lot of people think, I'll just use it for the hump. But they haven't really made the foundational changes. Yeah. And this is where I say, there's nothing wrong with working with a coach or a nutritionist or someone. Get some, if you have to pay someone to give you support, do it by all means, or if you want someone who they're going to help you stay accountable, then why not?
It's very interesting because we're used to obviously running a personal training facility and a coaching facility. People are quite used to spending money on personal training to help them, to work with an expert, right? Someone who knows more about the physical body than they do and to keep them accountable. But we're not used to really spending money on our physical health from the sort of on the inside.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Which is quite interesting. But we're quite happy to spend, $500,000 on a car or something like that to get you to work.
Exactly. That's the mindset change, right?
Yeah.
Because, a lot of the people who listen to this podcast, they are super successful. And you think, well, these people might be paying their private banker a certain percentage a year to manage their assets.
To invest in an index.
To invest in an index or something else. But, you think, well, how much am I really spending on my own healthcare and managing my own health?
Yeah.
So I think it's just a mindset change where, hey, if I'm spending this percentage of my AUM on my investments, why not spend a small percentage of that on your own health and get a team, get a collaborative care team in place if you can afford it, right?
No, I think that's very sensible. And certainly with me, I noticed the more I kind of worked on myself, not just physically with nutrition, but also mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, I found that my desire to spend money on things and accumulate things just dropped precipitously, right?
Absolutely.
It's just not really interested anymore. And I think that's really interesting. And now let's say I felt, I'm feeling a little bit down today or something's not going right, and then I'm thinking, I could do with getting another leather wallet or something like that. It's like, okay, where's that thought coming from? And I'd use that as a check to see what's really going on.
But I think that only comes with age, right? You've had time to reflect, and you've realized that it's not the wallet that's giving me happiness. It's the feeling in purchasing. It's that feeling that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So then if we can find that feeling of, how to create our own happiness from something else and not something external, right? That takes a lot of time. And I'm sure we're all still discovering that.
Yeah.
But I think that is one of the beauties of aging. We have that time to reflect and we know that a little bit more. But, if I said that to my, 13-year-old self, I don't think she would have understood that. She would have wanted that.
Whatever, Mom.
I wanted that pencil case, or I wanted that purse or something, right?
Yeah. I think we can accelerate that process. It just doesn't just happen with aging. We can accelerate by being curious, right? At a younger age. I had one chap that worked with us. He was in his mid-20s, and he came in and he said, "Alex, I'm not sure if I should work with you guys, because I looked on the website. It says you only work with senior execs in their 40s and 50s." This guy was actually very successful, running his own business, and he was really down in the dumps. He's like, "Yeah, I don't really like running my company. I don't like working with the staff. I dread getting up in the morning." His business had taken on a life of its own, and he's kind of lost control of it. He was basically just down in the dumps. He had a yellow Lamborghini parked outside, mid-20s. And I was like, "You're exactly the right place, because you're having exactly the same thoughts that people who are 20 years older than you having." So I thought that was doing fantastically well now. He hired his brother to join his company, started buying football teams, so doing more in his passion and getting away from the, but yeah, really good. But so it's really interesting. Anyway, I'm going off at a tangent. So I want to go back to what you said about inflammation and how that's really important, and looking at that, because the more inflammation we have in the body, the more likely we are to be in fat storage mode and stubbornly hang on to the visceral fat and adipose tissue that you mentioned. So one thing I like to do is to get I get their food logs, I throw it into Chronometer, I do a very detailed 10-day log, and I like to look at the omega-3, omega-6 ratio. And if you look at a common diet in Singapore, it's a lot of chicken. It is predominantly the most consumed meat. Chicken, which has obviously been fed a very grain-based diet and not a natural omnivorous diet, which a chicken should eat, and a lot of grains, flour, rice, things like that. So it's very high in omega-6, very low in omega-3s. So that's a balance I like to look at. But what else? Do you look at that? And what are your thoughts on inflammation? What else drives inflammation, and how can we bring it down?
Well, I think the WHO says that inflammation is the number one killer. It's the common denominator in all chronic diseases: heart disease, lung disease, cancer, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, chronic kidney disease. All of these diseases are based in inflammation. But the difficulty is that every person displays their inflammation in a different way. Some people, that inflammation goes into excess weight. Some people, that inflammation is incredibly internal, and that can turn into cancer or damaged organs. Some people, the inflammation comes out through their skin. There's acne, rosacea, eczema. So from the functional perspective, it's very important to figure out, what's the source of inflammation and what kind of person are you and how is it coming out? Because then the strategy is different. But inflammation is something I think we are still learning about, and we need to learn more about. And but it's a chemical process. There are cytokines, there is an immune reaction, and there are these biomarkers that we can test for to see levels of inflammation. But again, going back to our earlier discussion about how sometimes people see these biomarkers, but they just don't feel the weight of it, so they don't know really how to change it. But so I think it's recognizing that inflammation is very individual, but we have to recognize and take it seriously. I think that's important.
Yeah. So again, it's sort of going back and looking at the stress, the diet. And
exactly.
what
Sorry, and I didn't answer your question about omega-3s and 6s.
Yes.
But yes, omega-3s and 6s, a lot of times you don't actually test for it. There are tests to see how, what your...
I think they're pretty hard to get in Singapore. I'm not sure.
Yeah. They're not, but you just have to find the provider who can. But it is a great marker to have, because you're right. It's the high chicken consumption. It's the high seed oil consumption, through the cooking, those are really high in omega-6s, and omega-6s are much more pro-inflammatory than the omega-3s. But you have to remember these omega, are these fatty acids are something that we don't actually make ourselves. So we have to get them through food.
Yeah.
But the omega-6s and the omega-3s, they share the same transporter in our body. So so imagine having a train, and you've got team 6 and team 3. If team 6 jumps on board the train first and takes up all the seats, team 3 is trying to get on. There's just not many seats available.
Yeah.
So really, we have to recognize we really need to get team 6 off, and we want omega-3s to jump on first.
Yeah.
And that way the omega-3s are, much more anti-inflammatory in sort of the downstream cascades that they have in terms of the chemical pathways.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I didn't realize they shared the same transport, but I've often said to people, if you are going to have omega-6s, make sure you're consuming them with omega-3s, because then I just assumed that the body would intelligently take the preferential one that it needed at that time.
Yeah. No, but that's why a lot of people, when you actually test them, they're not in the optimal ranges for omega-3. And the testing's really simple.
It's very low. People don't get much omega-3s, particularly with a lot of the fish and the ruminants, the red meat. It's all grain fed. So then they have a completely destroyed fatty acid profile as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the farm salmon, I'm not sure about you, but I just do not go near farm salmon with a barge pole. That is a filthy animal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no.
It's just gross, right? I don't know if you've seen the documentary Fillet-O-Fish. I totally recommend it. It's just disgusting. The animal is disgusting. But I don't eat salmon.
I think we have to look at, a lot of people say, I'm eating salmon for the omega-3s. And then you have to think, well, how did that salmon get the omega-3s?
Yeah.
Number one, cold water, fish will be different than warm water fish.
Yes.
And the salmon you want, the cold water fish are a bit more fatty. But where are they getting that from? They're getting it from the algae that they're consuming. So algae is a great source of omega-3, but we don't often think of that. So, we say, oh, it's not as bioavailable, but it's like, we want the precursor sometimes more than the actual, product, because with the precursors, our body can then regulate it. Okay, we need more of it, we'll make more of it. We have enough of it, we don't have to use it right now.
Yeah.
So our body is incredibly sensitive to feedback mechanisms. And I think sometimes we forget that. And, this goes into the supplements conversation. I worked with a woman who lived in the Middle East and, exposed to sunshine every day. For 20 years, she had been taking calcium supplements, but she still...
Calcification of the arteries,
right, but she still was, technically in osteoporosis. Yeah. And you'd think, well, you've got sunshine, vitamin D, right, plus the K2 that people, the supplements, and the calcium. But why wasn't that getting into her bones? That was a different issue. She had, inflammation in the gut, and there were a lot of other things, but her body just wasn't absorbing it. But you're right, it was overloading the calcium in her blood. So it's not just a function of, I'm getting loads of omega-3s. You got to look at, yes, the source, and maybe the salmon's not a great source, but we want to look at, why do we need it?
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. And this is one of the reasons I don't like supplements, is because in nature, nothing was individually packaged. It came up with a bunch of synergistic nutrients and vitamins and minerals, and that would help us absorb them all. And they used to give calcium supplements to women when they were pregnant, and they now realize that you need vitamin D to absorb the calcium. Otherwise you get calcification of the arteries.
I'm not saying that there's no place for supplements. I think there's a time and place, and it's very individually dependent. Like if you're a burn victim and you're in the hospital, you will probably need some sort of supplements. But generally speaking, your average person who is relatively healthy, has access to a normal diet. I don't think we need supplements. And I think the studies also show, on an individual level, yes, there might be some, benefits, and some might have some drawbacks, but on a population level, it's sort of net neutral. So it's a huge industry. It's a very unregulated industry. And yet we're going for net neutral. For me, it doesn't make sense.
No, you're quite right. Let's fix the diet first. Exactly. And if that doesn't work, then maybe we can look at the supplements.
Exactly.
But I've never seen anyone that hasn't had amazing changes by fixing the diet, right? Because we know it works. Food works. We've been eating it for
Yes.
however many millions of
Yeah.
years.
I think we're speaking the same language here.
Yeah. I used to take it. I mean, when I started, I was really into biohacking, which you'll be very familiar with coming from LA. But yeah, really into biohacking. I would take loads of supplements and things like that. Now I don't take any. But so I have been in the trenches on that one.
Yeah. No, I think there are ways to biohack through food, for example, chia seeds, really easy, very accessible. You can travel with it. I like to call that, a food-based biohack.
Yes.
1 tablespoon of chia seeds has almost 10 grams of fiber, right? Get 3 in one day and already you've hit your RDA for fiber.
Yeah.
So everything else is kind of a bonus. Also this chia seeds, when you put them in water and they become very jelly, like kind of gloopy.
My wife loves chia seeds.
Exactly. Right. That's it's absorbing water. So chia seeds can absorb 10 times its weight in water. Guess what? We consume that. What happens with that water? It gets released in our gut. And that's incredibly hydrating. So seeds are a great biohack.
Yeah.
Biohack.
Yeah. I remember, I think it was Terry Walls. She had MS and she was a doctor from the States, and she cured herself of MS on a very strict paleo diet. And she used to take cabbages in her luggage whenever she traveled anywhere, because broccoli, apparently it loses like 50% of its micronutrient profile within 24 hours have been picked from the field. Whereas cabbage keeps it for a lot longer, up to a week. So she would put all these organic cabbages in her luggage, so she would always have plenty of cabbage.
That is commitment. I love it. That is commitment.
Well, she was a PhD doctor with MS, right? And so she needed to keep her brain on tip-top shape.
Yeah.
But yeah, really well. So, wow, there's so much we could talk about. We're definitely going to have to get you back on again. But let's do some quick fire questions, right? So,
okay.
So I've got a list of some things here, and I want you to tell me if they're beneficial or detrimental for your health. And if you really must, you can say it depends.
Okay.
And just give me just a quick sentence why, if it depends, right? So let's go. First one, intermittent fasting, 16-8. So that would be 16 hours of not eating and 8 hours of eating. Beneficial, detrimental, or it depends?
It depends on when you're eating and when you're fasting.
Okay. Can you expand on that a little bit?
So a lot of times I see people who come in and they say, I've been intermittent fasting for years now, and they can manage their weight, but they're micronutrient deficient. They still have issues. And the timing of that is off. So they are eating mostly late in the day. So they're starving until, not starving, but they're fasting until about 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. or even doing that one meal a day, and they choose dinner because that's the most social time. And then they're eating really late at night. You're kind of going against your own physiology, whereas we are diurnal human beings. We're diurnal animals. We follow the circadian rhythm. And so we kind of forget that we have insulin, which is peak in the morning, and glucagon, which is that hormone at night. So we're kind of going against that by doing the fasting at night. So while it helps in sort of restricting the calorie intake for the day, I think there are ways to improve intermittent fasting, and people need to understand how to do that better.
Yeah.
Sorry, that wasn't a quick fire answer.
No, that's great, but we could do a whole podcast of that. That's great.
Yeah.
Next one. Vegetable seed oils such as canola oil, corn oil, and sunflower oil.
Terrible.
Excellent. Totally agree. Next, white sugar.
Ooh, I'd say terrible.
Okay, good. Next, wheat flour. So by proxy, things like cakes, cookies, pasta, white bread.
Terrible.
Terrible. Okay. The keto diet.
Ooh, I'd say it depends.
Okay.
And I think it also depends on the person. The keto diet was started for patients who had epilepsy, right? So there's a time and space for that sort of diet. I think we've kind of used that, and it's kind of turned into we don't want to call it the carnivore diet, but it's morphed into a keto carnivore diet. So I'd say you have to be careful with that.
Yes, agreed. There's a time and a place. Next one, vegan diet.
Loaded word, vegan. I try not to use it.
Okay, let's say plant-based diet then. Okay, no animal products whatsoever. So nothing that is an animal or comes out of an animal.
So I would have to say then caveat that with a whole foods plant-based diet, then yes.
Beneficial. Okay. Paleo diet.
Again, if we could
paleo diet has to be whole foods.
It
right?
has to be whole foods, but I'd say it depends. It depends on the ratio of what you're eating.
Okay.
So if you think, oh, well, our ancestors before us ate mostly meat, that would be incorrect. So if that's what you're going off of and your paleo diet is mostly off of animal products, then I'd say, be careful.
It's probably not. Yeah, I think maybe a better word for the paleo, I would agree, but I think a better word is maybe an ancestral diet. What is ancestrally correct for your genes?
Yeah,
right?
I think that's a better word for it. Yeah.
Yeah, because ancestrally that would have. I looked at, and I'll just, as an aside here, I study the work of Weston Price a lot, who traveled around the world visiting many tribes in the 1930s. And he found that the Aborigines in Australia, the ones that lived on the coast, got 90% of their energy from shellfish, from animal products, and 10% from carbohydrates. Whereas the Aborigines in the mainland Aborigines that lived in the middle of the bush, in the middle of Australia, they would get 90% of their energy from carbohydrates and fiber, and only 10% from animal products. Presumably when a stray kangaroo unluckily wandered past camp or something like that. But what he found were exceedingly healthy, no incidents of tuberculosis, which was killing everyone else around the world at the time. He was a dentist. They had perfect facial structures, incredibly healthy, and actually lived to quite an old age. They died from things like, a spear through the neck or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Until they went, of course, to the modern Australian towns and cities and then moved on to processed foods.
Yeah, no, I think...
so it shows how diverse the diets are,
exactly. Right? I think ancestral is a nice way to put it because it sort of sums up genetics and it also talks, when you think about a diet, you're also thinking about the metabolic effect, right? And when people back then were moving a lot more and, hunting and having to get, there's already that metabolic piece mix put in. Obviously, there was no sort of like, those long lasting additives or anything. So that all impacts the microbiome as well. So so I think I like that word, ancestral diet.
Okay, cool. 2 more. High intensity interval training.
Oh, HIIT.
Yes, HIIT.
I can't. I'm gonna say I always ask personal trainers not to comment on nutrition with their clients. So I'm gonna say I'm not gonna comment on the exercise.
Okay.
But I think anecdotally I've heard more people get more injured than they do the benefits. But I think they love it for the community aspect.
Yes.
So yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'll put that in. It depends then.
Yes.
And the last one, which I have to ask you, being an ex-journalist, the news. Beneficial, detrimental, or it depends?
Oh, it depends, but I'm going to skew myself towards detrimental. I think nowadays social media or the news is putting out a lot of, piecemeal information, and it's confusing people and it's adding to the noise. So I think if we focused on sort of the textbook knowledge that we have, that would be so much more helpful to society.
Yes, I agree. They started introducing the news into my son's school he's at 11, so last year primary school. And they wanted him to follow, CNN and the BBC and stuff. And I said, well, I sent them an email. How about he follows the Good News Network, which only puts out good news, which we don't see enough of because there's too much doom and gloom in the world.
Yes, yeah.
I'm trying to keep the kids happy.
Exactly.
Perspective. They'll end up being adults.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. It's all about the perspective, right?
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So we're going to wrap up now with your, and I ask everyone this. So I just want your top three health and wellness tips.
Okay, my top 3 tips.
Yes.
I'd say number 1, I think you need to understand inflammation and sources of inflammation and not just look for the hack. We talked about how the body whispers before it screams. I think we need to listen better and and try and identify those sources of inflammation as our body is whispering.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That'd be number 1. number two, I would say, let's not get lost in the isolated symptoms, the reductionist view. We are human beings. We're very complex. And so I think we need to remember to take a step back sometimes and look at the big picture, look at things integratively, look at things functionally. And I think sometimes we go down rabbit holes and we get too stuck in the details, and we need to have a bigger perspective on health.
Love it. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one?
Number three, I think the biggest thing is to remember that food is a chemical instruction. It is a daily, moment to moment conversation with our immune system. And that conversation can either drive inflammation and disease, or it can drive healing and resilience. So I think we have to remember that food is a chemical instruction.
Awesome. Fantastic. So thank you very much for coming on today. It was a great conversation. We can definitely do more on this. Could you just let folks know where they can find you if they want to know more about you or get in touch with you?
Oh, thanks, Alex. A little plug for myself.
Sure.
So my website is rapidnutritiontherapy.com. So please go there. And otherwise, people can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks.